In the dim corridors of a palace that had long renamed opulence into habit, the air carried a sourness no incense could mask. Velvet curtains trembled with the weight of breath and decay. Candles burned low, and the sound of a distant bell measured heartbeats like a clock counting down a court. Could you stand in a chamber where the sovereign who reshaped dynasties now smelled of rot and regret? Today, we will reveal the grotesque and unavoidable end that met Henry and those who orbited his throne, a tale of ulcer and gangrene and of how power failed to shelter flesh. Before we begin, please hit like to keep these stories alive. And without further delay, let us move to the bed that became a courtroom and to the hands that alternated between ointment and order. Chroniclers wrote of corridors perfumed and poisoned at once, as if the palace itself was trying to forget a ruler it once celebrated. Expect images of the bedchamber, of litters and pulleys, of surgeons arguing over an amputation, of priests murmuring rites, of courtiers bartering succession. Imagine standing by that bed, watching dignity unravel into infection and politics twist around the scent of flesh. Now we enter the scene. Henry had been a figure of colossal appetites and decisive edicts, a prince who turned marriages into treaties and treaties into law. As a child, he learned to command and to be feared, learning to read the shapes of alliances as other boys learned to read letters. In youth, he hunted and hunted again until the chase became a curriculum of dominance. In middle years, his body began a private campaign of rebellion. An injury at tournament and years of indulgence left a leg that swelled and darkened beneath silken hose. The wound became an ulcer, then an angry bruise, then something worse. By the time pus tracked like a small river down his calf, court physicians whispered gangrene and sealed chambers with perfumed sachets. Those 2 paragraphs of memory alone explain the arc from crown to cot and connect his past appetite for control to the present loss of control. In the bedchamber, the first sensory impression was the mix of sweet and sickening. Lavender pouches hung from bedposts to disguise an underlying smell. Linen tasted of alcohol as servants dampened cloths for his brow. A brass heart clock on a mantel clicked unevenly, and a slow bell struck every quarter hour, counting out a noble's last measures. The bed groaned as attendance shifted, and the mattress took impressions like a map of suffering. There were at least 5 sensory moments. The cool of a tiled floor against the warm rush of breath, the metallic tang in the air from medicinal mixtures, the rough tug of wool against his skin, the sour whisper of sweat, the scratch of parchment as secret orders were written. Servants gathered at the foot of the bed in a hush of muffled shoes and folded sleeves, and exchanged soft directives. Agnes, the chamberer, bent close and spoke first. Thomas Cromwell stayed by the doorway, whispering counsel. Dr. Butts adjusted a damp cloth and muttered remedies. Sir Anthony Denny counted names for possible succession. Bishop Gardiner prayed aloud, and the Archbishop moved through petitions as if through fog. The dialogue that followed was careful and nervous, and must be heard with the slow cadence of a court that fears both contagion and collapse. He cannot bear the weight of blankets any longer. Tell him the messages must be written, he will sign if he breathes. His pulse is thin and his leg runs a fever. If he commands, we must obey, but if he cannot, we must prepare. We must secure absolution first, then counsel on matters of state. The prayers will steady him, let no one interfere. He asks for wine, though it turns his mouth bitter. Offer small sips and a pen placed near his hand. No more wine, it will inflame the wound. Then bring ink and seal, we will bind the papers after. Keep his mind to God and memory to the realm. The back and forth revealed the court as an organism trying to sustain both a man and a machine of governance. The servants spoke with intimacy and fear. Their hands smelled of herbs and soap, and sometimes of blood. Each line was a negotiation between devotion and calculation, and all the sounds were framed by that low ticking bell. Beyond the bed, the palace contained contrivances intended to ward off both odor and scandal, and to grant the appearance of control. A series of litters and portable chairs were pressed into service to move the sovereign with minimal jostle. Pulleys installed by an enterprising carpenter named Edmund the Maker and ropes threaded through beams allowed elevation of the canopy to change air. Craftsman Richard the Upholsterer ordered extra padding and perfumed linings bought from a dealer named Marcellus. The description that follows explains the apparatus in technical clarity, for 300 characters. The elevating canopy worked by a simple block and tackle system to lift heavy curtains and adjust ventilation, while a trap beneath the bed allowed soiled linen to be replaced with minimal disturbance, preserving dignity and limiting exposure. Courtiers watched these machines as if machinery could substitute for medicine. In that circle of pulley and perfume, a second sensory cluster appeared. Candles sputtered and left a residue of smoke on fresco ceilings. The scent of rosemary clung like a talisman. The metallic scrape of a quill writing orders punctured the hush. The candle wax warmed the palms of attendants while the chill of stone floors crept up on bare ankles. One could taste the copper of worry when a chronicle was opened for reading. Named figures walked the room and performed actions that anchored the scene. Thomas Cromwell gripped documents and argued for haste. Archbishop Cranmer instructed intercession. Dr. William Butts tested poultices and declared contraindications. Sir Anthony Denny mediated between physicians and counselors. Lady Mary of Suffolk arrived with letters from the fleet. Each did something concrete and visible, and each reaction shifted the balance of authority. Delirium introduced another sensory ensemble. In dream states, the king murmured of hunts as though forests were summoning him to ride again. He saw beheaded priests or imagined the sound of pockets filled with coins morphing into bees. He clutched for memories and for faces at once real and invented. The 5 to 6 sensory images of this episode included the salt of tears drying on cheeks, the rasp of linen against lips, the ghost taste of stale ale, the flicker of sunlight through stained glass, the phantom scent of roses that were not there. The delirium scene also demanded an extended direct exchange between the sovereign and those closest, an intimate, rapid back and forth of at least 8 to 10 turns. Henry: why do the hounds not come? Cranmer: the hounds wait in prayer, not in this chamber. Henry: they say my name, and it sounds like a bell. Agnes: your name rings like thunder, sire. We keep it safe. Henry: I feel my leg is a foreign country. I do not know its borders. Dr. Butts: the leg has betrayed you. It spreads like a fire. Henry: call for more. Bring him to me. Thomas More: I would stand if it served you, yet I am not at court. Henry: send word then. Send word and a bed for confession. Sir Anthony Denny: shall we call the surgeon to bind the wound? Henry: bind it with what? If I bind it, I may bind my heirs also. Dr. Butts: we must choose between speed and survival. Agnes: if you rest your hand on the pen, we will write quickly. Henry: then lay me a pen and a prayer, and keep watch over my sons. Delirium mixed politics with personal terror. Memory and governance braided as last illusions and legalities tangled. The sovereign's speech veered into allegory, yet each phrase had weight because a signature might follow. The struggle then moved into the domain of medicine and of stark decisions. Men in linen coats argued under the veil of candles about bloodlettings and about the need for bolder measures. The debate required extended dialogue, at least 8 to 10 exchanges among physicians and advisors. and a clear technical exposition of proposed intervention in roughly 300 characters to satisfy both curiosity and plausibility. The technical explanation follows. A surgical amputation in this period required ligatures of twisted thread to constrict arteries, followed by cauterization with heated iron or by application of compresses and poultices to stem bleeding and prevent infection. It was a crude measure that risked shock and further gangrene, yet sometimes removed the only source of decay. The debate was raw and full of stakes. Dr. Butts, the wound festers. We risk systemic infection. Master Surgeon Halsey, if we cut away the rotten flesh, he may live. Dr. Butts, amputation would strain his heart. He is weak. Master Surgeon Halsey, leaving the limb will let death travel upward. Thomas Cromwell, the council must decide, not only the surgeons. Sir Anthony Denny, we cannot have ministers arguing over a blade while the sovereign dies. Archbishop Cranmer, consultation must include absolution, and the archbishop must be present. Bishop Gardiner, political consequences follow any delay. If he signs before the operation, the realm is safer. Dr. Butts, we can prepare ligatures and cautery, but there will be shock. Master Surgeon Halsey, the operation itself could be swift, yet the aftercare commands vigilance. Thomas More, consider also the message to foreign courts that the king undergoes such a procedure. Dr. Butts, if we fail, he will be remembered for pain. If we succeed, we may prolong a tyrant. The tension around the surgical table was a collision of bodies, law, and diplomacy. Instruments lay on a tray, their metal catching candlelight like small accusing mirrors. The scent of alcohol and vinegar mixed with the coppery note of blood and with the sweet lies of aromatic oils. Servants shifted, prayers were whispered, and a chronicled note was taken on parchment. When the end came, it was both intimate and ritualized. A last speech, uncertain and thick with fever, was uttered perhaps to ask for forgiveness or perhaps to demand that no one call his rule into question. The room filled with a sevenfold set of sensory details. The cold of a robe draped over shoulders, the taste of ink from a hastily signed testament, the dampness of a pillow, the distant sonorous beating of a tower bell, the smell of embalmer's herbs, the creak of a coffin lid, the sight of faces turned away. Embalmers arrived with their trays, materials, and tools. They spoke of spices and of the methods to preserve and to present the corpse. The act of embalmment was described in precise terms, as required by the script, and included the application of aromatic spices, the removal of organs, and the packing of cavities with perfumes and resins, and the anointing of skin with preserving salves. The embalmer's procedure, explained in practical terms, filled medical notes and public rumor. For preservation, they opened cavities, removed viscera, and treated them with mixtures of salt, wine, and aromatic resins, then packed linen and herbs into the hollows before closing the chest and wrapping the body in oiled cloth. The goal was to slow decay and to present a semblance of life for viewing. The ritual was performed while a choir intoned psalms and an archbishop offered a final benediction. The coffin was sealed, yet already rumor described a stain that leaked like a treacherous history. News left the palace like a slow oil stain. The procession that carried the sovereign to the abbey or cathedral turned into a public theater and a scandal. The coffin was borne on a litter through streets lined by curious and by those who wanted to witness a symbol of change. The sensory elements here were loud. The smell of torches, the dust of 1,000 feet, the metallic glare of armor, the soft sob of cloaks, and the sudden sickening sight of a darkened stain on linen. At least 5 named figures reacted in public, and all their actions are recorded. Thomas Cromwell rode ahead dispatching messengers. Sir Anthony Denny organized the procession. Lady Mary watched from a tower. Bishop Gardiner preached restraint, while Archbishop Cranmer insisted on ceremony. Sir Francis Bryan whispered cautions to ambassadors from France. The coffin reached the abbey amid murmurs, and then a new horror emerged that fed rumor and political opportunists. A crowd gathered and an accusation spread that the coffin oozed with stain, not simply from fluids, but from a corruption that echoed governance left unchecked. Chroniclers recorded versions as if each manuscript or parchment sought to claim the original scent of truth. Some said the coffin leaked blood, others said it sweated preservatives, and that the public spectacle turned from solemn to scandalous. Street cries shifted from sorrow to mockery. The reaction in the city was a second crisis. 3 moments of extreme tension punctuated these events, and each demands examination with depth and length. The first occurred when the surgeons declared the wound beyond their skill, and the council hesitated. Precedent and fear collided. The room smelled sharply of vinegar and salt as arguments ricocheted. The surgeons' voices rose and then fell as they debated whether to cut or to comfort. While each syllable weighed heavy, the court waited for a decision that would determine not merely a body, but the shape of succession and of treaties abroad. Officials scribbled last-minute instructions while the sovereign drifted between lucidity and the wild map of fever. A vote was called and hands were raised with reluctance and resolve. The second moment came during the embalmer's work, when jars were opened and the acrid smell of drugs and herbs flooded the chapel attendants. A servant fainted and a noble covered his face, denying the possibility of mortal remains being so mutable. Political factions used the site to accuse rivals of poisoning or of neglect. The third high-tension scene erupted in the street when the procession passed a marketplace, and cries turned to demand for accountability. Commoners asked what their taxes had bought them and whether a court that could not cure a wound could govern fairly. Each of these scenes lasted in memory like a bruise and altered alliances. The political ripples were immediate and international. Embalming and spectacle did not halt the rumor mill. The question of succession that had been theoretical became urgent. Letters crossed the sea, and envoys from Spain and France sharpened their pens. Treaties were reviewed, and ambassadors from both courts gathered copies of the sovereign's last directives. To see where advantage might be pride, the death forced a temporary dispensation in domestic law as counselors rearranged clauses and secured allyships. Thomas Cromwell wrote missives to secure regents, while Sir Anthony Denny marshaled troops to key garrisons in case of unrest. Bishop Gardiner and Archbishop Cranmer argued about interdicts and the spiritual presentation of continuity. Merchants calculated the immediate economic shock. Grain prices rose briefly and coin flowed into mints as nobles transferred assets. Internationally, the vacuum invited posturing. The ambassador of France presented condolences that contained maps of interest. The envoy of the Holy Roman Empire sent a treaty to be revised within weeks. These changes were not only rhetorical, they redrew lines of negotiation about marriage alliances and shipping rights. The epilogue unfolds in measured time and with tangible consequences. 1 month after the sovereign was lain in the abbey, the court still smelled faintly of the embalmer's scent. The palace chambers had been aired and perfumed, hangings had been replaced, yet whispers persisted. Even in private studies, parchment continued to be turned, and the kingly hand applied to sealed writs and acts was the subject of debate. The Regent Council had convened with Thomas Cromwell at its head, and Sir Anthony Denny enforced security in palace precincts. Markets had quieted. Goods that had been stockpiled as a precaution were released into towns, and grain merchants met in the city to stabilize prices. The Archbishop issued a public sermon on order and succession to calm rumor, while Bishop Gardiner issued private letters urging caution to noble houses. In the streets, common folk stitched stories into songs. A playwright wrote a short piece about hubris and decay, and chroniclers produced multiple accounts on parchment, all vying for primacy. The mood was a fragile hush, broken only by bells that marked memorials and that reminded the populace that the realm must carry on. 3 months later, the first legislative shifts were evident. The council had ratified emergency measures that clarified lines of succession and had placed guards at key ports to deter foreign maneuverings. An emissary from Spain arrived, bearing a revised treaty that offered favorable terms in exchange for trade rights, and a marriage negotiation was quietly proposed. The economy steadied as merchants signed contracts and mints produced coin stamped with a new motto to suggest continuity. The legal dispensation that allowed swift royal decrees in times of incapacity was formalized into a statute that courtiers later invoked for decades. The abbey where the sovereign lay became a site of pilgrimage for some, and for others a place of curiosity. The scandal of the leaking coffin had been investigated by a committee that included surgeons and apothecaries whose report blamed inadequate preservation rather than malfeasance. Yet the report did not end suspicion. Instead, certain noble houses used the episode to question the competence of advisors and to press claims for increased influence. The court found itself more insular and more deliberate. Each letter now passed through multiple hands as if contagion could be contained by bureaucracy. 6 months on, the landscape had shifted more deeply. The succession was secure, a new monarch had been proclaimed, and foreign powers recognized the new reality. But old rivalries had not vanished. They adjusted their calculations. Treaties were rewritten, and some merchants prospered while others were ruined by earlier speculation. Succession law reforms were debated in the Great Hall, and an office was created to archive the sovereign's last decisions in parchment, sealed and indexed by a new clerk named Henry the Younger. This archive later became a repository for treaties and letters that historians would consult. The archbishop had gained temporary moral authority that he now tried to translate into lasting religious reforms. The embalmer's techniques were codified into a set of procedural notes that were studied by physicians and by craftsmen who made coffins and litters. Pulleys and portable chairs were improved. A new generation of makers, led by Edmund's apprentice John, updated designs so that future processions might be less prone to scandal. Public memory turned the grotesque into a cautionary tale. Plays and sermons invoked the image of a sovereign undone by his own flesh. In politics, the event justified a tightening of administrative oversight and the imposition of a registry for official health declarations. The economy adapted. Shipwrights signed longer contracts, and a new treaty on grain shipments with the Low Countries was sealed. Memory hardened into lesson. In the final reflection, the image lingers of a bed that smelled of both perfume and pestilence, a crown that could not buy immunity, and a court that learned to translate private infirmity into public law. The death altered treaties and succession, and taught rulers and subjects alike a sharp lesson about vulnerability of power. If one asks what is to be learned, perhaps it is this. The body of a sovereign is never merely private. It is a public ledger, a ledger that records infirmity and recalibrates alliances and laws. If you found this account unsettling, share it with someone who appreciates how small mortal matters change great affairs. If you want more investigations into the endings that shaped history, subscribe and join a community that reads the scars of the past as maps for the present. Remember that even the greatest throne cannot hold back decay. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and good night.